She was left to die with her newborn twins. But a mountain man arrived and everything changed. High on a frozen ridge, a young mother is cast out by her own people, clutching 2 crying babies as the wind howls around her. The wolves are closing in. The storm is rising. And she has nowhere left to run. Then, out of the white silence, a rough mountain man appears, guided by a dream he doesn't understand. He carries her to safety, thinking the danger is over. But it isn't. Because someone is hunting those twins, someone who believes their birth is a curse, and is willing to spill blood to erase them. And when a buried prophecy begins to surface, one tied to land, water, and the future of the whole valley, the truth becomes more dangerous than the storm they escaped. Now the mountain man and the mother must outrun betrayal, face a tribe divided by fear, and uncover why so many are terrified of 2 tiny infants. If these babies were saved for a reason, what powerful secret are they carrying? And who will rise or fall when that truth is finally revealed? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The winter wind howled across the Colorado highlands, its bitter fingers clawing at the small Ute village nestled among the snow-laden pines. Inside a lodge warmed by dying embers, Lena Whitefeather lay exhausted on her sleeping mat, her dark hair damp with sweat from her long labor. 2 tiny bundles, wrapped in soft deerskin, rested in the crooks of her arms. "They are beautiful," she whispered, touching each perfect face with gentle fingertips. The twins, a boy and a girl, had her high cheekbones and their father's strong brow. Their skin was still red from birth, their tiny fists clenched against the cold that seeped through the lodge walls. But the joy of motherhood turned to ice in her chest as she noticed the elders' faces. They stood in a tight circle near the lodge entrance, their expressions dark as storm clouds. Elder Shockwit, his face deeply lined with age and authority, spoke in hushed tones to the others, gesturing sharply with gnarled hands. "The twin curse," one whispered, the words carrying like poison on the wind. "It has not happened in 3 generations." Lena's Aunt Standing Fawn pushed through the group, her silver-streaked hair catching the firelight. "There is no curse," she insisted, kneeling beside Lena. "These are blessed children given by Creator. Look how strong they are, how they already reach for each other." The babies stirred, making small mewling sounds. Lena drew them closer, her heart pounding. She had heard the old stories of twin births bringing disaster to the tribe: drought, disease, conflict with settlers. But surely in these modern times, such ancient fears had no power. Elder Shockwit's voice cut through the murmurs like a knife. "The signs are clear. The winter has been harsh, the game scarce. The white men push closer to our hunting grounds each season. We cannot risk the anger of the spirits." "But she is one of us," Standing Fawn protested. "Her grandmother was our most respected healer. Would you cast out her blood?" A younger warrior, Kanya, stepped forward. His eyes were troubled beneath his eagle-feathered headband. "The old ways are not always right. Times change. Perhaps these twins are a blessing, not a curse." But Elder Shockwit raised his hand for silence. "The council has spoken. Before dawn, she must leave the village. The spirits must be appeased." Lena clutched her babies closer, her voice trembling but firm. "Please, they are innocent. At least let me stay until they are stronger." But the elders turned away, filing out of the lodge into the snowy night. Only Standing Fawn remained, tears freezing on her weathered cheeks. "I will bring you what supplies I can gather quickly," she whispered, squeezing Lena's hand. "Pray to Creator. He has not abandoned you." The next hours passed in a blur of fear and preparation. Standing, Fawn brought thin blankets, a water skin, and a small pouch of pemmican, all she could smuggle without drawing attention. As the sky began to lighten toward dawn, 2 warriors appeared at the lodge entrance. They carried Lena and her twins on a travois through the deep snow, up a wind-swept ridge far from the village. The silence was heavy, broken only by the baby's whimpers and the crunch of snowshoes. Even Kanya, who had spoken in her defense, kept his eyes downcast as they laid her beneath a twisted pine. "May Creator have mercy," he murmured, touching his chest in blessing before turning away. Lena watched their retreating forms disappear into the pre-dawn shadows. The wind cut through her blankets like icy knives, and in the distance, wolf howls echoed off the canyon walls. She pulled her precious bundles closer, trying to share what little warmth remained in her body. "My strong ones," she whispered, touching each downy head. "My son, I name you River, for you will carve your own path through stone." The boy's tiny fingers curled around her thumb. "My daughter, I name you Sky, for you will rise above all that would harm you." The girl nuzzled closer, seeking warmth. The wolves' calls grew closer. Lena could see their shadows moving through the trees below the ridge. Her tears froze on her cheeks as she began to sing the lullaby her grandmother had taught her, her voice carried away by the merciless wind. "Sleep now, little ones, while eagle watches high, dream of summer sunshine, dream of butterfly." Miles away, in a crude line shack built of rough-hewn logs, Eli Ravenford thrashed in his sleep. The dream came again, more vivid than ever before. A woman with long, dark hair, cradling 2 infants in the snow. Wolves circled closer, their yellow eyes gleaming with hunger. Above them all, an eagle wheeled against storm clouds, crying out in a human voice, "Her children will save your valley." Eli sat up with a gasp, his heart pounding. The fire had burned low, leaving the shack in shadows. Outside, the wind moaned through the pines like a lost soul. He had been having variations of this dream for weeks now, but never so clear, never so urgent. Running a hand through his graying hair, Eli tried to shake off the lingering images. He was a practical man, had been ever since losing his wife Sarah and their infant daughter to fever 5 years ago. Dreams were just dreams, he told himself, born of loneliness and too many solitary winters in the high country. But something wouldn't let him rest. The woman's face haunted him, her quiet strength, her desperate love for her babies, and that voice, speaking of salvation for the valley he had sworn to protect as a frontier ranger, before grief drove him to this hermit's life. "I'm getting soft in the head," Eli muttered, but he was already pulling on his heavy wool coat and leather gloves. He lit a lantern and stepped out into the bitter night, making his way to the lean-to where his horse stamped restlessly. The big bay gelding snorted steam into the freezing air as Eli saddled him, cinching the straps tight. He packed his rifle, extra ammunition, blankets, and what medical supplies he had. "Don't know where we're headed, old friend," he told the horse, "but something tells me we need to hurry." The storm was building as they set out, fat snowflakes swirling in the lantern light. Eli let the horse pick its way carefully through the drifts, trusting some deeper instinct to guide them. The dream images pulled at him like an invisible rope, up into the highlands, toward the territories where the Ute people still held their traditional lands. As false dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Eli heard the wolves. Their hunting calls echoed off the canyon walls, making it hard to pinpoint their location. But his horse's ears pricked forward, and that strange urgency in his chest grew stronger. They were close to whatever had drawn him out into this God-forsaken storm. Back on the ridge, Lena had stopped singing. Her voice was too hoarse, her strength fading. The wolves had grown bolder, working their way up the slope. She could see their dark shapes moving through the trees, closer with each pass. The twins slept fitfully, protected only by her body and the inadequate blankets. "Creator," she prayed, her words carried away by the wind, "if you must take me, spare my children. Let someone find them. Let them live." Through the growing light and swirling snow, she thought she heard something. A sound that didn't belong to wind or wolves, the steady crunch of hooves breaking through snow crust, the quiet jingle of tack. Was her mind playing tricks, painting false hope in the dawn? But the sounds grew clearer. A horse's snort, the creak of leather. Through the curtain of falling snow, a lantern's glow approached like a star come down to earth. The wolves melted back into the shadows as a tall figure on horseback emerged from the storm. The rider dismounted quickly, moving toward her with careful steps. Lena clutched her babies tighter, uncertain whether this new arrival meant salvation or further threat. "Ma'am?" The man's voice was gentle, though rough with disuse. He held the lantern higher, revealing a weathered face lined with concern. "I'm Eli Ravenford. I don't mean you any harm." Lena looked up into eyes the color of summer sage, set in a face that seemed somehow familiar, though she knew they had never met. The man knelt beside her in the snow, setting down his lantern and shrugging off his heavy coat. "You're near frozen," he said, wrapping the coat around her and the twins. "Can you stand? My cabin's a few hours' ride from here. We need to get you warm." "My babies," Lena managed through chattering teeth. "Please, help my babies." "All of you," Eli assured her, his large hands gentle as he helped her to her feet. "I've got supplies, blankets. We'll get you safe." As he helped her mount his horse, keeping her steady with strong arms, Lena felt the first spark of hope since her ordeal began. The twins stirred against her chest, but didn't wake. Behind them, the wolves had begun to slink away, their hunt thwarted by this unexpected intervention. The sun finally crested the mountain peaks, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of rose and gold. Eli led his horse carefully down the ridge, one hand on the reins, the other ready to steady his precious cargo. Neither spoke much. Words seemed inadequate for the strangeness of their meeting, the weight of what might have happened if he had ignored his dream. Above them, an eagle appeared briefly through a break in the clouds, wheeling once before disappearing into the storm. Eli felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. That voice from his dream echoed in his mind. "Her children will save your valley." Looking up at the young mother and her twins, somehow surviving against all odds, Eli felt something long dormant stir in his heart. Not just purpose, but perhaps the first whispers of faith returning. Whatever power had sent him that dream had guided him through the storm to this exact spot at this exact moment. Well, maybe it wasn't finished with him yet. The snow continued to fall as they made their way down the mountain, erasing all traces of the tragedy that had nearly occurred. But with each step toward shelter and safety, new tracks were being laid, not just in the fresh snow, but in the lives of those brought together by destiny, faith, and the courage to follow a dream into the storm. The wind howled across the ridge, its bitter fingers clawing at Lena's thin blankets. She curled tighter around her newborn twins, trying to shield them from the relentless cold. Their tiny faces were pressed against her chest, their breaths coming in small puffs that gave her hope they still lived. The wolves had grown bolder in the last hour. Their yellow eyes gleamed from the tree line, drawing closer with each pass. 5 of them now, maybe more hidden in the swirling snow. Lena could hear their paws crunching in the fresh powder, their low growls carrying on the wind. "Great Spirit," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Watch over my little ones." She pressed her lips to each small forehead, memorizing their faces while she still could. The boy had a tiny birthmark shaped like a leaf near his temple. The girl's fingers were long and delicate, like her grandmother's had been. A wolf, larger than the others, took another step forward. Lena tried to make herself bigger, to look strong despite her exhaustion. "Stay back," she commanded, though her voice trembled. The wolf's ears flicked forward, assessing. Another step. Through her growing despair, a new sound reached her, different from the wind's moan or the wolves' growls. Hoofbeats, steady and purposeful, coming up the ridge. Lena blinked hard, certain her mind was playing tricks born of desperation. But the sound grew clearer. Out of the white haze, a massive bay horse materialized like a spirit, steam rising from its flanks. Its rider was tall, wrapped in dark wool and leather. For a heartbeat, Lena wondered if this was death coming for her in human form. Then she saw his face, weathered but kind, with eyes that held both wisdom and pain. The wolves turned toward this new arrival, hackles rising. The stranger's reaction was swift. He swung down from his horse in one fluid motion, bringing up his rifle in the same movement. The shot cracked across the ridge like thunder, sending the wolves scattering back several yards. But they didn't flee completely. The big alpha stood his ground, teeth bared. The stranger reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a branch wrapped in oil-soaked rags. With practiced movements, he struck a match and touched it to the makeshift torch. The flames caught quickly, painting the snow in dancing orange light. "Get back," he shouted, his deep voice carrying authority as he advanced on the wolf pack, swinging the burning branch in wide arcs. The flames and motion finally proved too much. The alpha turned tail, and his pack followed, disappearing into the storm like smoke. Only then did the stranger turn fully to Lena. He moved slowly, as if approaching a spooked horse, and knelt beside her in the snow. This close, she could see the concern etched in the lines around his eyes, the gentle way he held out his hands. "You're alive," he breathed, wonder and relief mixing in his voice. "I wasn't sure. The dream—" He shook his head, focusing on the immediate need. "My name's Eli Ravenford. Let me help you." Lena wanted to be cautious. A lifetime of tribal wisdom warned against trusting strange white men. But there was something in his face, something that spoke to her spirit of safety and truth. Still, she clutched her babies tighter when he reached toward them. "The little ones first," Eli said softly. "They need warmth more than anything." He shrugged out of his heavy wool coat, the one that had been keeping him alive in the brutal cold. "May I?" After a moment's hesitation, Lena nodded. Her arms shook as she helped him wrap the twins in the coat's warm folds. Eli handled them with surprising gentleness for such large, calloused hands. He cradled them like precious things, checking their breathing and color before bundling them securely. "They're strong," he told her, and she heard the smile in his voice. "Like their mama." He handed the wrapped babies back to her, then turned to his horse. "Think you can stand? We need to get you all somewhere warm, and I've got a cabin a few hours from here." Lena tried to push herself up, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. Hours in the snow had left them numb and useless. Without comment, Eli slipped one arm behind her shoulders, the other under her knees, and lifted her as if she weighed nothing. She clutched the twins to her chest as he carried them to his horse. "Easy now," he murmured, helping her into the saddle. He arranged her skirts to cover as much of her legs as possible, then added a blanket from his saddlebags. After making sure she was stable, he fashioned a rope harness around her waist, tying her securely to the saddle horn. Can't have you falling if you get too tired to hold on. The descent from the ridge was treacherous. Snow had drifted deep in places, hiding rocks and drops. Eli led his horse on foot, one hand steady on the reins, his eyes constantly scanning for the safest path. The wind cut through Lena's wet clothes, making her teeth chatter uncontrollably. "Keep talking to me," Eli called up to her. "Tell me about your little ones. Have you named them yet?" Lena had to work to make her frozen lips form words. "The boy, I call him Ahote. It means restless one. He kicked so much before birth." She looked down at her son's peaceful face, praying he would live to grow into his name. "The girl is Taluta, blood red, for the sunrise when she was born." "Fine names," Eli said. He was watching her closely, she realized, making sure she stayed alert. "My people would probably call them sunrise and sunset. You can see both colors in their faces." They continued like that for hours, Eli drawing her out with gentle questions whenever she started to drift. He told her about his cabin, promised there would be fire and hot food. His voice became a lifeline she clung to, keeping her tethered to the world of the living. The light was fading when they finally reached the line shack. It was small but solid, built of thick logs chinked with mud and moss. Smoke rose from the stone chimney. The fire had stayed alive in his absence. Eli helped her down from the horse, but her legs crumpled immediately. Without hesitation, he gathered her and the twins into his arms. "Almost there," he assured her, carrying them to the door. He managed to work the latch with his elbow, then kicked it shut behind them as they entered. The cabin's interior glowed with welcoming firelight. Heat from the hearth reached out to them like a warm embrace. Lena felt tears freeze on her cheeks, tears of relief, of gratitude, of bone-deep exhaustion. Her babies were alive. They were safe. Whatever tomorrow might bring, they had survived today's impossible odds. Eli stood just inside the door, still holding them close, as if he couldn't quite believe they were real. The fire's light caught the silver threading through his dark hair, the worried crease between his brows, the gentleness in his eyes that didn't quite hide old sorrows. Outside, the wind continued to howl, but it couldn't touch them anymore. This rough cabin, with its dirt floor and single room, seemed to Lena the finest palace in the world. Her children would live. She would live. And something told her that this strange, kind man who had followed a dream through a blizzard to save them, he would live again too, in ways he had forgotten were possible. Inside Eli's cabin, the fire cast dancing shadows on the rough-hewn logs. The single room was small but tidy, with a narrow cot against one wall, shelves stocked with provisions, and a solid wood table that had seen better days. Heat from the stone fireplace wrapped around them like a protective blanket, slowly chasing the deadly cold from Lena's bones. Eli gently settled Lena and the twins on his cot, adding extra blankets he pulled from a trunk. "Need to get you warmed proper," he said, moving to the fireplace where an iron pot hung from a swing arm. He added more wood to the flames, then filled the pot with fresh snow to melt. Lena watched him through heavy eyes, still cradling her sleeping babies. Her hands and feet had gone from burning pain to a dangerous numbness hours ago. Now, as feelings started to return, the agony made her breath catch. "Your extremities need tending," Eli said, noting her discomfort. He pulled a wooden chair close to the cot. "May I see your hands first?" Lena hesitated, then carefully shifted the twins to rest beside her. She extended her trembling hands toward him. Eli's touch was surprisingly gentle as he examined her fingers, which had turned an angry red with patches of white. "Frostbite," he said grimly, "but we caught it in time." He reached for a cloth and dipped it in the warm water he'd prepared. With careful movements, he began to bathe her hands, gradually increasing the water's temperature. "This will hurt some as circulation returns. Tell me if it gets too much." The pain indeed intensified, but Lena set her jaw and endured. She'd survived worse today. As Eli worked, she studied him more closely. His face was weathered from years in the mountains, with crow's feet at the corners of his eyes and silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. But it was his hands that held her attention, strong and capable, yet treating her injured fingers as if they were made of spun glass. One of the twins stirred, making small, hungry sounds. "Ahote," she knew without looking. He was always the first to wake, true to his restless name. "They'll need feeding," Eli said, finishing with her hands. He turned away, giving her privacy. "I'll tend your feet after, if you'll allow it." Lena adjusted her clothing with clumsy fingers and gathered Ahote close. As she nursed him, Eli busied himself at the fireplace, adding ingredients to a pot of stew. The domestic sounds, the crack of the fire, the soft clinking of the spoon against the pot, her baby's contented sighs, created an illusion of safety that made her throat tight with unexpected emotion. When Taluta woke moments later, Eli helped Lena shift positions so she could feed her daughter. He kept his eyes averted but stayed close, passing her water and additional blankets as needed. His quiet support made the task manageable, despite her weakened state. Once the twins were settled again, Eli returned to his healing work. He treated her feet with the same careful attention he'd given her hands, gradually warming them with cloths dipped in water. The pain was worse here. She had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. Without comment, Eli began to hum softly, an old hymn that somehow made the hurt more bearable. As the night deepened, exhaustion pulled at Lena. She fought it, still unsure whether she could trust this stranger completely, but her body had other ideas. She drifted in and out of consciousness, waking occasionally to find Eli still vigilant, tending the fire or checking on the twins. During one such moment of awareness, she saw him standing by the cot, looking down at her sleeping babies with an expression of such profound sadness, it made her heart ache. His whispered prayer carried clearly in the quiet cabin. "Lord, it's been a long time," he said softly. "Haven't asked for much since you took Sarah and little Mary. But these three need strength I'm not sure I have anymore. Help me do right by them." Lena closed her eyes quickly when he turned, pretending sleep. But his words stayed with her, adding another layer to her understanding of this solitary mountain man who had followed a dream through a blizzard to save them. The next 2 days passed in a blur of small moments that gradually built trust between them. Eli kept the fire well fed, stepping out regularly to split more wood. The sharp crack of his axe became a steady rhythm that marked the passing hours. Inside, he showed Lena how to navigate the cabin's confined space as she began to move around more, always ready with a steadying hand when her strength wavered. His cooking was simple but nourishing, hearty stews thick with dried vegetables and preserved meat, hot cornbread that filled the cabin with its homey smell. He seemed to take particular pride in caring for the twins, fashioning a clever sling that helped Lena carry them both at once, and warming blankets by the fire before wrapping them. On the second evening, as they sat near the hearth sharing a meal, Lena finally spoke of what had brought her to that windswept ridge. Her voice was quiet but steady as she described the elders' reactions to her twins, the whispered fears of ancient curses. "Elder Shockwit spoke against me most strongly," she said, watching the flames dance. "He said twins bring disaster, drought, disease, death to the tribe. The old stories say they must be exposed or their curse will poison everyone." She looked down at her sleeping babies. "I cannot believe the Creator would make such perfect beings only to curse them." Eli was silent for a long moment, considering her words. Seems to me that fear makes people see curses where there's really just blessings they don't understand yet. He stirred the fire, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. Maybe that's why I was sent that dream. Tell me about this dream, Lena said, curious despite her skepticism. Eli described the vision that had woken him, the woman and infants in the snow, the voice speaking of salvation for the valley. Hadn't had a dream that clear since, well, in a long time, he finished. Couldn't ignore it, even if it seemed foolish to ride out in that storm. You risk much on the word of a dream, Lena observed. Reckon some risks are worth taking? His eyes held hers for a moment before returning to the fire. Besides, seems to me we were all saved that day. You three from the cold, and me from something just as deadly. What is that? Loneliness, he said simply. Been up here by myself too long, letting old griefs freeze my heart harder than any winter storm. The honesty in his voice touched something in Lena. She found herself sharing more of her own story, her grandmother's teachings about healing herbs, her hopes for her children, her fear of returning to the tribe who had cast her out. Eli listened without judgment, offering quiet comments that showed he understood the complexity of being caught between two worlds. As the second day drew to a close, Lena faced a decision. Her strength was returning, but she was far from fully recovered. The twins were thriving in the cabin's warmth, and Eli had proved himself both capable and trustworthy. Still, accepting help from a white stranger went against everything she'd been taught. She watched him preparing the evening meal, noting how he'd already learned each twin's different cry and could tell which one needed attention. He moved with quiet competence, anticipating needs before they arose. There was a peace in this small cabin that she hadn't expected to find. The weather's clearing, she said finally, but I'm not yet strong enough to travel far. Eli looked up from the stew he was stirring. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. Cabin's small, but there's room enough. And I meant what I said about protecting you and the little ones. You would do this for strangers? You're not strangers anymore, he said simply. And I reckon that dream wasn't just about saving you from the storm. Maybe it was about all of us finding something we needed. Lena considered his words, looking around the cabin that had become a sanctuary. Her babies were safe here. She was safe here. And something told her that Eli needed them as much as they needed him. Then we will stay, she said, until I am strong again. Eli nodded, satisfaction and something like relief crossing his face. Reckon that's the right choice. He returned to his cooking, but Lena noticed his movements were lighter, as if a weight had lifted from his shoulders. Outside, the wind had finally died down, leaving a pristine stillness in its wake. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled warmly, and two tiny breaths rose and fell in peaceful sleep. Lena felt the last of her tension ease. They would stay, and tomorrow would bring what it would bring. For now, this small space held everything they needed: warmth, safety, and the beginning of trust between two wounded souls who had found each other in the heart of winter. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through Eli's cabin windows as the snowfall finally began to ease. The steady thunk of his axe splitting wood carried through the thin walls, a rhythmic counterpoint to the gentle Ute lullaby Lena hummed while tending to the twins by the hearth. The babies, now several days old, lay contentedly on a soft deer hide, their tiny fingers curling and uncurling in sleep. Lena adjusted the blankets around them, smiling as one yawned and stretched. The silver pendant her grandmother had given her glinted in the firelight as she leaned over them. Its familiar weight against her chest brought comfort, a connection to her people despite their rejection. The cabin had become a sanctuary of sorts, warm and safe from both weather and judgment. Outside, Eli paused in his work, rolling his shoulders to ease the ache. The woodpile had grown impressive over the past days, his way of keeping busy while watching over his unexpected guests. The sound of jingling harness cut through the winter silence, followed by a man's voice calling out, "Hello, the cabin. Anyone about?" Eli set down his axe carefully, eyes scanning the tree line. His rifle stood propped by the door, but he hoped he wouldn't need it. "Who goes there?" he called back, moving closer to the cabin. "Just old Preacher Josiah, friend. Looking for shelter before nightfall catches me proper." Relief eased Eli's tension. He knew Josiah by reputation, a circuit rider who served the scattered homesteads and mining camps throughout the territory. The preacher's gray-bearded figure emerged from the falling snow, leading a tired-looking horse. "Much obliged if you could spare a corner for the night," Josiah said, his breath clouding in the cold air. "Storm caught me between settlements." Eli glanced back at the cabin, thinking of Lena and the twins inside. But he couldn't leave any traveler out in this weather, especially not a man of God. "Reckon we can make room," he said finally. "Let me help. You with your horse." Inside, Lena had heard the exchange. She gathered the twins closer, uncertainty flickering across her face. But when Eli opened the door to usher in the preacher, she saw kindness in the older man's weathered features. "Well now," Josiah said softly, taking in the scene before him. His eyes moved from Lena to the infants, then back to Eli, but no judgment showed in his expression. "Seems the Lord's been busy up here on the mountain." "Found them in the storm a few days back," Eli explained briefly, moving to the hearth to stir the stew that had been simmering all afternoon. "Couldn't leave them to the wolves." "No, indeed," Josiah agreed, removing his snow-crusted coat. "The good book tells us to shelter the stranger and protect the innocent." He bowed slightly to Lena. "I'm Josiah Hale, ma'am. I hope my presence doesn't disturb your little ones." "They sleep soundly," Lena replied carefully. "I am Lena Whitefeather." Josiah's eyes brightened with recognition at her name. "Whitefeather? Any relation to the medicine woman, Sarah Whitefeather?" "My grandmother," Lena said, surprise evident in her voice. "Met her years ago, when I first came to these mountains," Josiah said, accepting the bowl of stew Eli offered him. "A wise woman who knew much about healing, both bodies and spirits." As they ate, the conversation flowed easier. Josiah shared news from the settlements, speaking of spring planting plans and new families arriving in the valley. His presence seemed to fill the small cabin with warmth beyond what the fire provided. The twins stirred, and Lena moved to tend them. As she bent over the babies, the silver pendant swung free from her shawl, catching the lamplight. Josiah's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth, his eyes fixed on the charm. "That pendant," he said slowly. "I've seen its like before." Lena's hand went to the silver piece. "My grandmother gave it to me before she walked on to the spirit world. She said it carried old medicine, old stories." "May I?" Josiah asked, setting down his bowl. At Lena's careful nod, he moved closer to examine the pendant without touching it. "Yes, the same markings. The river and mountain symbols joined as one." Eli shifted forward, interest piqued by the preacher's intense focus. "What's special about those marks?" Josiah settled back, his expression thoughtful. "Years ago, when I first came to these mountains, I met an old Ute woman, a keeper of stories. She spoke of a prophecy about children yet to come, born of mountain and river blood." His eyes moved to the sleeping twins. "Children who would end the feuds over land and water that plague our valley." The cabin grew very quiet. Even the fire seemed to crackle more softly as Josiah continued. She showed me a pendant like this one, said it would mark the chosen ones, said when they came, they'd be born as twins, something rare and feared among her people. But what others saw as curse would actually be blessing. Lena's hands trembled as she touched each baby's cheek. My grandmother, she used to whisper similar stories when I was small, tales of peace-bringers who would heal the broken trust between peoples. But I never thought. The Lord works in mysterious ways, Josiah said gently. Sometimes what seems like hardship is actually His hand moving us toward greater purpose. Eli stood abruptly, moving to add wood to the fire. His shoulders were tense as he spoke without turning. Seems a heavy burden to place on babies not even a week old. Perhaps, Josiah agreed, but they won't carry it alone. He looked meaningfully at both Eli and Lena. The prophecy spoke of guardians, too, ones chosen to protect and guide these children until they could fulfill their calling. The implications of his words hung in the air. Eli finally turned back to face them, his expression troubled, yet somehow lighter, as if pieces of a puzzle were falling into place. The dream that had sent him into the storm, the instant connection he'd felt to the twins, it all took on new meaning. Getting late, he said gruffly, but without real resistance. Might as well have a prayer before turning in. Josiah nodded, folding his hands. His prayer was simple but touched with both Christian grace and Ute wisdom, speaking of Creator's love for all His children and asking blessing on this unlikely family gathered in the cabin's warmth. To everyone's surprise, Lena's voice joined his, adding soft words in her native tongue, blessings she remembered from her grandmother's teachings. The twins slept peacefully through it all, unaware of the destiny being discussed around them. As the fire burned low and Josiah's gentle snores filled one corner of the cabin, Lena remained awake, watching her babies by the dying light. Her fingers traced the pendant's familiar patterns, river and mountain joined as one. She thought of her grandmother's knowing eyes, of the elders' fears, of Eli's protective presence, of Josiah's prophecy. Were her children truly cursed, as the elders believed? Or were they meant for something greater, peace-bringers in a land torn by mistrust and greed? The answers lay somewhere in the future, as mysterious as the shadows dancing on the cabin walls. For now, her babies slept safely, sheltered by these walls and the people fate had brought together. Whether curse or calling, she was no longer alone in facing whatever lay ahead. That thought brought comfort as she settled beside her children, letting the fire's remaining warmth lull her toward sleep. The firelight cast long shadows in the lodge as the elders gathered, their faces creased with worry and anger. Wind whistled through the gaps in the wooden walls, but inside, the atmosphere was heavy with tension. Elder Shockwit sat at the head of the circle, his weathered hands gripping his walking stick until his knuckles whitened. 3 days, he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. 3 days and no sign of the woman's body or the cursed one's. The flames flickered across his face, deepening the lines of concern etched there. Around him, other elders muttered in agreement. The hunting party's leader, a man called Red Hawk, leaned forward into the firelight. "We found tracks near the ridge," he reported, drawing lines in the dirt with a stick. "Here, where we left them. But then," he scratched more marks. "Horse prints, boot marks from a white man." The news sent a ripple of unease through the gathering. Elder Shockwit's grip tightened further on his staff. "Someone interfered with the cleansing," he said. "The twins still live. The curse remains among us." In the shadows at the edge of the circle, Toma shifted uncomfortably. He could still see Lena's face as they'd carried her away, his own cousin, whom he'd played with as a child. The memory of her pleading eyes haunted his dreams. "Perhaps," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "we have let fear twist our old ways, our ancestors." "Silence!" Elder Shockwitz's staff struck the ground. "You forget yourself, Toma. These are dangerous times. The railroad companies press closer to our lands each season. The settlers multiply like rabbits in spring. We cannot afford weakness or division now." Other elders nodded gravely. One spoke up. "The twin curse has always brought disaster. Our stories tell of floods, failed hunts, sickness following such births. We cannot risk such ill fortune, not when we must stand strong against the white man's greed." Toma felt the weight of their stares. He was respected among the warriors, known for his skill as a scout and hunter. But here, before the elders, he felt like a child again. His loyalty to tradition warred with the voice in his heart that whispered this was wrong. Elder Shockwitz's dark eyes fixed on him. "You are of Lena's blood, Toma. You know these hills better than any other. You will track her." It wasn't a request. Toma's throat tightened, but he forced himself to nod. "Yes, Elder. I will find her trail." "Good." The old man's voice softened slightly. "You understand this must be done, for the good of all our people." The meeting broke up shortly after, elders dispersing into the night. But Toma remained by the dying fire, watching the embers fade to ash. He thought of Lena's babies, so small and perfect. How could new life bring curse instead of blessing? Yet he had been raised on these traditions, taught to respect the wisdom of the elders. His mind churned with doubt. Dawn found him already mounted, supplies packed for tracking. The morning was crisp and clear, the storm's fury spent. Fresh snow blanketed the landscape, but beneath it, Toma knew he would find sign. He started at the ridge where they had left Lena. The snow had drifted deep here, but he could still read the story written in the layers. There, where they had set her down. Here, the marks of wolves circling. And yes, horse tracks, partially filled but distinct. Heavy boots had left their print, too, showing where someone had dismounted. Toma followed the trail with practiced ease, though he moved slowly. Sometimes he rode his sturdy pony, other times dismounted to examine signs more closely. The horse tracks led down from the ridge, picking a careful path through the rocks. Whoever the rider was, he knew these mountains well. The sun climbed higher as Toma worked his way down into the valley. He recognized this country. It was near the border of their hunting grounds, where the mountains began to give way to more rolling country. Few settlers ventured this far up, preferring the easier lands below. As dusk approached, Toma reached a ridge overlooking a small valley. He dismounted, moving cautiously through the trees. There, a thin thread of smoke rose from a cabin tucked against the far slope. He'd heard there was a mountain man who trapped these parts, but he'd never seen the man himself. Toma settled into a protected spot with a clear view. From his leather bag, he drew out the brass binoculars he'd traded for last summer. They were well worth the 3 fine beaver pelts he'd given up. Through their lenses, the distant cabin jumped closer. As he watched, the cabin's door opened. Toma's breath caught in his throat. Lena stepped out into the fading light, cradling both babies against her chest. She looked tired but alive, so alive. She turned her face to the sky, breathing deeply of the evening air. A tall man appeared behind her, the white stranger whose tracks Toma had followed. He draped a blanket around Lena's shoulders with gentle hands, careful not to disturb the sleeping infants. When Lena smiled up at him, Toma had to look away. Pain squeezed his chest. His cousin lived, had found shelter and protection. But she had accepted help from an outsider, one whose very presence near their lands would anger the elders. The twins still lived. The curse the elders feared still hung over the tribe, by their reckoning. What truth would he tell when he returned? If he reported Lena's survival, the elders would send warriors to finish what they'd started. More blood would stain the snow. But if he lied, if he claimed to have found signs of wolves and death, Toma watched as Lena and the white man went back inside. The cabin door closed, lamplight glowing warmly through its single window. Silently, he backed away from his observation post, leading his pony deeper into the gathering shadows of the forest. He had found what he came to seek. Now he had to choose between duty and mercy, between tradition and the voice of his conscience. The weight of that choice pressed down on him like a physical burden as he disappeared into the darkening trees. Behind him, smoke continued to rise from the cabin's chimney, carrying the promise of warmth and shelter into the cold mountain air. Within those walls, Lena's babies slept safely in their mother's arms, unaware of the forces gathering against them. And in the Ute village, the elders waited for Toma's return, their determination to eliminate the perceived curse hardening with each passing hour. The mountains held their secrets in silence as night fell, the stars emerging one by one in the vast Colorado sky. What had begun as a simple tracking mission had become something far more complex, a test of loyalty, tradition, and the courage to question long-held beliefs. For Toma, the long ride home would be filled with doubt and difficult choices. The truth he would tell waited to be decided, hanging in balance like the fate of his cousin and her twins. Dawn light filtered through the cabin's single window as Lena sat in the rocking chair, nursing one of the twins while the other slept nearby in a makeshift cradle. The gentle creaking of wood mingled with soft baby sounds and the pop of the morning fire. Preacher Josiah stood at the rough-hewn table, carefully rolling his worn Bible in a piece of oilcloth. "The weather's turned fair enough for traveling," the preacher said, securing his saddlebags. "Got 3 homesteads to visit before Sunday's service down in the valley." Eli nodded from where he was pulling on his boots. "Reckon I should make a supply run myself, running low on flour and coffee." He glanced at Lena. "You'll be all right here with the little ones?" Lena looked up, determination crossing her face. "I want to go with you." She adjusted the nursing baby against her shoulder. "I need to see this valley that might be our new home, and—" Her voice softened. "I don't want to be alone." Eli started to protest, but saw the quiet strength in her eyes. After 5 days in the cabin, she'd proven herself tough as mountain pine. Still, he worried. "Town ain't always friendly to outsiders?" "Then I must learn to face that too," Lena replied simply. Josiah smiled. "The Lord doesn't give us more than we can handle, though sometimes we wonder." He helped gather supplies while Eli and Lena prepared the twins for travel. Lena secured one baby in a traditional cradle board she'd fashioned from cabin materials, then settled the other in a sling across her chest. Eli marveled at how she managed both with such grace. They wrapped the little ones in extra blankets against the mountain air. Outside, their breath fogged in the cold morning light. Eli helped Lena mount his gentlest horse, then secured the cradle board carefully to the saddle. He swung up onto his other horse, and they set out with Josiah riding alongside. The journey down from the highlands was slow but peaceful. Fresh snow draped the pines, and winter birds called from the branches. Josiah shared stories of his circuit-riding adventures, speaking of God's grace found in unexpected places. After an hour, they reached a fork in the trail. "This is where I leave you," Josiah said, turning his horse toward a distant ranch. "God be with you both." He tipped his hat and rode away, his gray beard catching the sunlight. Eli and Lena continued on, the horses picking their way carefully, down the slope. The twins stayed remarkably quiet, lulled by the steady motion. Around them, the landscape gradually opened up. Fewer pines, more rolling hills dotted with scrub oak and sage. "It's beautiful," Lena said softly, taking in the vast sky and distant mountains. "Different from my people's hunting grounds, but beautiful still." They reached the valley floor by midday. The small town appeared ahead, a cluster of wooden buildings with a few brick structures marking its heart. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the sound of hammering carried from the smithy. Eli noticed Lena's back straightening as they approached, her chin lifting slightly. He guided them to the hitching post outside the general store, helping her down carefully with the babies. The store's bell jingled as they entered. Mrs. Hatcher looked up from her ledger, her round face breaking into a smile. "Well now, what have we here?" She hurried around the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. "Twins!" she exclaimed, peering at the babies. "Oh, aren't they precious? Born in the cold snap, were they? Poor little mites." She clucked sympathetically, then called to her helper. "Sarah, fetch that new batch of baby blankets from the back shelf." While Mrs. Hatcher fussed over the infants, another customer, a thin woman in a faded calico dress, drew back, lips pursing. "Savages," she muttered, loud enough to be heard. "Town's going downhill, letting their kind in here." Lena's face remained calm, but Eli saw her hold the babies closer. Mrs. Hatcher turned, hands on her hips. "That'll be enough of that, Mrs. Peterson. These babies are God's children, same as any other." The bell jingled again as a well-dressed man entered. Mr. Briggs, the railroad agent. His polished boots and crisp suit seemed out of place among the usual work clothes and trail dust. He smiled broadly at Eli. "Mr. Ravenford, good to see you in town." His voice was smooth as creek ice. "Been meaning to discuss the valley's future with you. Railroad's bringing progress, you know. Need to secure water rights. Plan for development." His eyes slid to Lena and the babies, then away. "Course, some obstacles will need clearing. The Ute are rather in the way of progress, wouldn't you say?" "The water belongs to all who live here," Eli said quietly. "Always has." Briggs's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Times change, Mr. Ravenford. Best to be on the right side of progress." He touched his hat and strolled out, leaving an uneasy silence. Eli and Lena gathered their supplies, flour, coffee, sugar, and the baby blankets Mrs. Hatcher insisted on including at a special price. Outside, Deputy Clay Harmon was making his afternoon rounds. The deputy nodded to Eli. "Ravenford." Then, with careful courtesy, he acknowledged Lena. "Ma'am." His weather-lined face showed neither welcome nor hostility, just the cautious respect of a lawman who'd seen too much trouble between settlers and tribes. The sun was lowering as they started, the journey home. Lena was quiet, processing all she'd seen. The twins had begun to fuss, ready for feeding, so they stopped in a sheltered grove. While Lena nursed them, Eli secured their supplies and checked the horses. That's when he spotted it, a small feather tied with sinew to a pine branch near eye level. Most would miss it, but Eli recognized it as a Ute marker. Someone had been watching. His eyes scanned the trees, but whoever left the sign, Toma, was long gone. He helped Lena mount up without mentioning the feather. As they rode the final stretch to the cabin, the setting sun painted the snow-covered peaks in shades of rose and gold. Their day in town had shown them both the warmth of friends like Mrs. Hatcher and the cold reality of prejudice. And now, that single feather warned that their peaceful isolation was ending. The cabin came into view, smoke still curling from the chimney where they'd banked the morning fire. Eli helped Lena down with the babies, then began unloading supplies. They worked together in the gathering dusk, moving between horses and cabin with practiced ease, as if they'd been doing this dance for years instead of days. 7 days had slipped by since their trip to town. Though quiet, each sunrise brought a weight of waiting. Eli had removed the warning feather but kept his Winchester rifle closer, cleaning it each evening by lamplight, while Lena sang softly to the twins. The snow had begun to melt, revealing patches of brown earth beneath the white blanket. On this particular morning, hoofbeats approached the cabin. Eli stepped onto the porch, rifle ready but held casual-like against his leg. A weathered rancher named Jim Parker rode up, reining his horse to a stop. "Morning, Ravenford," Parker called, pushing back his hat. "Got ourselves a barn raising tomorrow over at the Wilson place. Sarah lost her old barn in that big storm last month." He glanced past Eli to where Lena stood in the doorway with one of the twins. "Your family is welcome to come. Might do folks good to meet them proper-like." Eli studied Parker's face, finding no malice there, just the simple neighborliness that frontier life required. He turned to Lena, letting her decide. She stepped forward, the baby snug against her chest. "We would be honored," she said quietly. "Thank you for thinking of us." Parker nodded, clearly relieved. "Starts at sunup. Sarah's got coffee and biscuits planned." He touched his hat brim and rode away, leaving them to prepare. That evening, Lena laid out their cleanest clothes, while Eli checked the horse's tack. "You sure about this?" he asked, watching her sort through the few items they owned. "The twins need more than just us," she answered, folding a shawl. "They need a community that knows them, sees them as children first, not—" She trailed off, but Eli understood. They set out early the next morning, frost crackling under the horses' hooves. Lena had wrapped the twins extra warm, one secured, to her back in the cradleboard, the other nestled in front. The rising sun painted the valley in soft gold as they rode, revealing the first hints of spring in the willow branches. The Wilson Ranch came into view, a modest spread with a half-built barn frame, reaching skyward. Wagons and horses already crowded the yard. The air rang with hammering and men's voices calling back and forth. Smoke rose from outdoor cooking fires where women tended huge pots of coffee and stew. As they dismounted, Sarah Wilson herself hurried over. She was a sturdy widow with gray streaked hair and capable hands. "Welcome, welcome! Land's sake, look at those precious babies!" She gestured to a cluster of older women. "Ma Benson, come see these little ones." Soon, Lena found herself surrounded by motherly attention. Ma Benson, wrinkled as a dried apple but sharp-eyed, unwrapped the twins with gentle hands. "Strong little things," she declared, tucking a quilt around them. "Got good color. You're feeding them well, dearie." Other women gathered, offering advice about teething and colic, sharing stories of their own children. Their weathered faces softened as the twins gripped their fingers. Lena soaked in their wisdom, feeling the ache of missing her own female relatives ease slightly. Eli joined the men working on the barn frame, his carpenter's skills quickly earning respect. Some cast uncertain glances toward Lena, but seeing her tender care of the babies and easy way with the women seemed to settle their doubts. By mid-morning, Preacher Josiah arrived, his saddlebags bulging with Bibles and medical supplies, regular items for a frontier circuit rider. He gathered everyone for a blessing over the barn raising. "Lord," his voice carried clear in the crisp air, "bless this work of many hands. Let this barn shelter not just beasts and hay, but the spirit of community that builds it. Guide us to see your face in our neighbors, whatever their origins." "Amen." Several people murmured, "Amen," though Colby Turner, a hard-faced rancher, turned away with a scowl. Eli had noticed him watching Lena with barely concealed disgust. The railroad agent, Briggs, worked the crowd with practiced charm. He moved from group to group, papers in hand, voice pitched low. "Progress is coming, friends. Best secure your water rights now. Railroad can guarantee fair prices for those who sign early." Some farmers looked tempted, especially those whose lands had suffered in recent dry years. Others seemed wary, remembering broken promises from other smooth-talking men. Work continued through the morning. Women passed around coffee and biscuits while men raised heavy beams. Children darted between adults, playing tag and collecting dropped nails. The twins stayed quiet, fascinated by all the activity. Around noon, Sarah called everyone to dinner. Long tables groaned with food: stews, cornbread, pies, and preserves. Lena found herself seated between Ma Benson and the preacher's wife, who showed her how to balance a baby while eating. "Land's sake, girl," Ma Benson said, bouncing one twin on her knee. "You're doing fine with these little ones. Don't let anyone tell you different." The afternoon brought more progress on the barn. Eli worked steadily, aware of both Colby's hostile glances and Briggs's calculating looks, but he focused on the task at hand, letting his actions speak. As sunset approached, fiddles appeared. Lanterns were lit, casting warm light over the newly raised barn. Someone called for a dance to celebrate. "Go on," Ma Benson urged Lena, taking the sleeping twins. "These little ones are just fine here with us grandmothers." Eli stepped forward, holding out his hand to Lena. She hesitated, then took it. They moved together as the fiddles played a slow waltz, her dark hair brushing his shoulder. Neither was much for dancing, but in that moment, under the stars with lantern light painting the new barn gold, it felt right. "Thank you," Lena whispered, "for bringing us here." Eli's arm tightened slightly around her waist. "Reckon we both needed to belong somewhere." The music ended too soon. They collected the twins, who had indeed been thoroughly spoiled by the grandmothers, and prepared to leave. Sarah pressed a basket of leftovers into their hands. Ma Benson tucked an extra quilt around the babies. Even some of the uncertain men offered gruff but genuine farewells. They rode home beneath a sky scattered with stars, the horses knowing the way. Lena leaned back against Eli's chest, the twins sleeping peacefully between them. The new barn had risen today, but something else had been built too. A fragile bridge between two worlds, held up by simple human kindness. Behind them, fiddle music drifted on the night air, carrying hope like a prayer across the sleeping valley. Morning sunlight streamed through the cabin's small window, casting warm patches on the rough-hewn table where Eli and Lena sat sharing a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush and dried apple slices. The twins dozed nearby in their makeshift cradle, tiny hands curled into fists. Eli had just lifted his tin cup of coffee when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made him pause. He set the cup down carefully, catching Lena's worried glance. After yesterday's barn raising, they had hoped for a peaceful morning. "Stay inside," he said quietly, reaching for his rifle before stepping onto the porch. A lone rider approached at an unhurried pace, hands held visible on his horse's reins. As he drew closer, Lena gasped from the doorway. The rider was Toma, her cousin, dressed in a mix of traditional Ute clothing and trader's goods. His face was carefully neutral as he raised his right palm in the traditional gesture of peace. "I come without weapons," Toma called out in clear English, "to speak with my cousin." Eli kept his rifle lowered but ready. "Lena?" he asked, not taking his eyes off Toma. She had rushed to the doorway, one of the twins held protectively against her chest. Her voice trembled. "He is my mother's sister's son. We grew up together." Toma dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. His dark eyes moved from Eli to Lena, then to the baby in her arms. Something flickered across his face. Pain, perhaps, or regret. "I followed to make sure you lived," he said. "I have watched from the ridges. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I want to make things right." "Right?" Lena's voice cracked. "You stood silent when they carried us to that ridge." "I know." Toma's shoulders slumped slightly. "That shame lives in my heart. But there is more you must know. The elders still speak of finishing what they started, of ending the curse." Eli stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Lena. "No one's finishing anything here." "Please," Toma said. "I came to warn you, and—" He gestured to the cabin. "May we speak inside? The morning grows cold." Lena looked up at Eli, who studied Toma for a long moment before nodding. "Your weapons stay out here." Toma removed his knife belt without hesitation, laying it beside the porch steps. Inside the cabin, the air grew thick with tension. The other twin stirred in the cradle, making soft noises. Toma's eyes were drawn to the sound. "Would you—" Lena hesitated, then stepped forward. "Would you like to hold one of them?" Eli watched intently as Lena carefully transferred the baby she held into Toma's arms. The warrior's weathered hands trembled slightly as he cradled the infant, looking down into the tiny face with moisture gathering in his eyes. "So small," he whispered, "like you were, when we were children." He began speaking in Ute, his voice taking on a gentler rhythm. He spoke of summers spent gathering berries, of their grandmother's stories by the fire, of the songs she would sing while weaving blankets. Lena responded in the same language, her voice catching on memories. They spoke of their shared grandmother, who had often mentioned ancient prophecies about children who would bring peace between the peoples. Throughout their conversation, Toma's glances at Eli remained guarded, assessing. The mountain man stood near the fireplace, giving them space to talk, but staying alert. The morning stretched into afternoon, filled with careful words and weighted silences. As the sun began its westward slide, Toma reluctantly handed the baby back to Lena. "I must return," he said, switching back to English. "I will speak to the elders. Ask them to see wisdom instead of fear. Remind them of the old ways, when we welcomed those who came in peace." "And if they won't listen?" Eli asked quietly. Toma met his gaze. "Then I will send word." He touched Lena's shoulder briefly. "You were always the strongest of us, little cousin. These babies—" He shook his head. "They are a blessing, not a curse. I see that now." They watched from the doorway as Toma collected his weapons and mounted his horse. He raised his hand once more in farewell before riding away, his figure growing smaller against the landscape. What they could not see was his stop just beyond the cabin's sightline, where he tied a small piece of red cloth to a hidden branch. The marker would be invisible to casual passers-by, but clear to those who knew where to look. Lena stood in the cabin's doorway as dusk painted the sky in deep purples and blues, watching the spot where Toma had disappeared. The twins were warm against her chest, one in her arms and one in a sling across her back. Her heart felt pulled in too many directions: love for the cousin who had been like a brother, fear of the threat he had warned them about, and uncertainty whether his visit truly meant peace or presaged betrayal. "He held them so gently," she whispered, more to herself than to Eli, who stood quietly beside her. "Like he used to hold the newborn foals when we were young." The evening wind carried the scent of pine and melting snow, along with the lonely call of a distant coyote. Somewhere in the gathering darkness, Toma rode toward the Ute camp, carrying both the memory of tiny hands gripping his finger and the knowledge of where to find them again. Eli placed a protective hand on Lena's shoulder, as the last light faded from the sky. "Come inside," he said softly. "Night's falling." She allowed him to guide her back into the warmth of the cabin, but her eyes remained distant, focused on memories and blood ties that ran deep as mountain roots. The twins began to fuss, hungry for their evening feeding, drawing her back to the present moment and the new family she had found. But questions hung in the air like smoke. Would Toma's words of peace hold true? Could the bonds of childhood overcome the fears that had driven her people to such desperate acts? And would the marker he had left, unknown to them, bring reconciliation or ruin? As Lena settled in the rocking chair to nurse the twins, these questions remained unanswered, drifting like shadows in the corners of their small sanctuary. The only certainty was the love she felt for her babies and the trust she had built with Eli. Everything else balanced on the edge of change, waiting to tip one way or the other. That same evening, after Toma's unsettling visit, dark clouds began rolling in from the west. The wind picked up, whistling through the cabin's log chinks with a mournful tone. Eli stood at the window, watching the sky turn the color of old bruises. "Storm's coming," he said, his voice low. "A big one, by the look of those clouds." Lena nodded, adjusting one of the twins against her shoulder. "I can feel it in the air, like the mountains are holding their breath." Through the night, the wind grew fiercer. Snow began falling, first in gentle flakes that soon became thick curtains of white. The cabin creaked and groaned under the assault, but the sturdy logs held firm. Eli stayed awake, feeding the fire and checking the windows, while Lena tended to the twins' midnight needs. By morning, the world outside had transformed. Snow had piled nearly to the windowsills, and more kept falling. The door wouldn't budge when Eli tried it. They were trapped until the storm passed. "Might be here a spell," he said, returning to the fire where Lena sat with the babies. 2, 3 days, maybe." She looked up at him, her dark eyes calm. "We have food? Wood? Enough, if we're careful." He did a mental inventory. "Got beans, dried meat, cornmeal. Wood'll last if we keep to one room and bank the fire right." They settled into a careful routine as the first day of their confinement stretched on. Eli showed Lena how to bank the coals to preserve heat while using minimal wood. She taught him how to wrap the twins in layers that would keep them warm, but not too confined. In the afternoon, while a pot of bean soup simmered on the hearth, they sat close to the fire. The twins dozed in their shared cradle, and the constant howl of wind made the cabin feel like the last safe place in the world. "Tell me," Lena said softly, "about your life before. You never speak of it." Eli was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with memory. "Had a wife once, Sarah, and a little girl, not much more than 6 months old." He stared into the flames. "Fever took them both, summer of '73. Started with a cough, then the heat came. Doctor was 3 days ride away. By the time he got there..." His words trailed off. Lena touched his arm gently. "What was your daughter's name?" "Grace." The word came out like a prayer. "We called her Gracie. She had Sarah's eyes, blue as mountain lakes." He drew a shaky breath. "After we buried them, I couldn't. Everything reminded me. The empty cradle, Sarah's shawl on its peg. I rode into these mountains and didn't look back. Figured God had turned his back on me, so I'd do the same to him." "The heart doesn't heal when we run from pain," Lena said quietly. "My grandmother taught me that Creator's mercy is like the river. It flows around the rocks we put in its path." "Your people didn't show much mercy," Eli said, then immediately regretted the words. "I'm sorry. That wasn't fair." But Lena nodded. Some let fear poison their hearts, but others remembered the old teachings. My Aunt Mai tried to stop them that night. She said twins were sacred in the ancient stories, that they carried double blessings, not curses. A few others spoke up too, but fear speaks louder than wisdom sometimes. Through the evening, they shared more stories. Eli about learning to track and hunt from his father, Lena about gathering herbs with her grandmother and learning the healing songs. The twins woke for feeding and changing, their small demands anchoring the adults in the present moment even as they explored their pasts. The second day dawned gray and threatening. The storm showed no signs of weakening, and the snow had climbed higher against the walls. They were eating a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush when they heard it, a low rumble that grew into a crack like thunder. Eli was on his feet instantly. Landslide! The sound of shifting earth and snow grew louder. Through the window, they could see part of the hillside above the woodshed starting to move, weighted down by the heavy snow. The shed's roof groaned as snow and earth pressed against it. The wood, Eli said urgently. If that shed collapses, we'll freeze before this storm ends. He grabbed his coat. Eli, no! Lena reached for him. It's too dangerous. But he was already pushing through the door, forcing it against the drifted snow. Lena watched through the window, heart in her throat, as he fought his way to the shed. The twins began crying, sensing her fear. Eli reached the shed just as another section of hillside gave way. He managed to grab an armload of wood before the cracking sound above him made him look up. The shed's supporting beam was splitting. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Eli threw himself backward, but not quite fast enough. One of the falling timbers caught him across the shoulder, driving him to his knees in the snow. The rest of the shed's roof collapsed with a thunderous crash. Lena didn't remember running outside. She was simply there, pulling Eli through the snow, her strength born of desperation. Somehow they made it back inside, both gasping and shaking. "Foolish man," she scolded, but her hands were gentle as she helped him remove his coat. His left shoulder was already swelling, angry red marks visible through his torn shirt. "Had to try," he ground out through clenched teeth. "Can't let you and the little ones freeze." "We won't freeze." She moved efficiently around the cabin, gathering supplies. "I need to tend this before it gets worse." From her medicine pouch, she took dried herbs, arnica for bruising, willow bark for pain. She made a poultice with snow-melted water, her movements sure and practiced. As she worked, she hummed a soft healing song her grandmother had taught her. The twins were fussing again, and Eli heard a concerning sound, a slight cough from one of them. Lena's head snapped up at the noise. "Keep still," she told Eli firmly. "I need to check the baby." She lifted the coughing twin, pressing her ear to the tiny chest. The cough came again, wet and worrying. Lena's face was calm, but Eli saw the fear in her eyes. "There are herbs for this, too," she said, more to herself than to him. She pulled more items from her medicine pouch, wild cherry bark, thyme, a bit of honey she'd been saving. She made a very weak tea, letting it cool before giving the baby tiny spoonfuls. Through the afternoon and into the evening, they watched the infant anxiously. Lena kept up a constant vigil, alternating between tending Eli's shoulder and monitoring the baby's breathing. As night fell, the cough began to ease, becoming less wet and frightening. Finally, near midnight, the storm's fury began to lessen. The wind died down to a whisper, and the heavy snowfall thinned to scattered flakes. The twins were sleeping peacefully, the sick ones breathing clear and regular. Eli was drifting toward sleep himself, his shoulder wrapped in Lena's poultice and propped carefully on pillows. Through half-closed eyes, he watched as Lena stood at the window, looking out at the star-filled sky now visible through breaking clouds. "Thank you," she whispered in Ute, then switched to English. Thank you, Creator God, for protecting us. Thank you, ancestors, for teaching me your healing ways. She touched each sleeping baby's forehead. Thank you for these little ones, and for sending us a man with a brave heart. Eli closed his eyes fully then, peace settling over him despite his throbbing shoulder. For the first time since losing Sarah and Grace, he felt the stirring of something he thought he'd lost forever. Not just hope, but faith. Faith in God's mercy, in love's healing power, in the future that seemed to be unfolding before them like a trail through freshly fallen snow. The storm had passed, leaving behind a transformed world. The final howls of wind died away to perfect stillness, broken only by the soft breathing of 4 souls sheltered together in the warmth of their cabin, each one changed by the trials they had faced together. Outside, the snow lay deep and unmarked, waiting for morning's light to reveal what paths lay ahead. The morning sun glinted off fresh snow as Eli carefully saddled his horse. 2 days had passed since the storm, and though his shoulder still ached when he moved certain ways, he could manage the necessary work. Inside the cabin, Lena wrapped the twins in extra blankets, humming softly as she prepared them for the journey ahead. Are you certain about this? Eli asked, adjusting the saddle straps. We could wait another day or 2. Lena stepped out, a baby nestled in each arm. The cough is gone, thanks to Creator's mercy and the old remedies. And you're right, we need to face what's coming, not hide from it. They had discussed this over breakfast, the need to establish their place in both worlds, to seek guidance about the future. The Ute Agency was their first stop, then the town church. It would be a long day of riding. Eli helped secure the twins in their carrying slings, making sure they were protected from the cold. Lena had packed dried meat, corn cakes, and extra swaddling cloths in the saddlebags. The morning air was crisp and clear as they set out, their horses' hooves breaking fresh trails in the deep snow. The ride to the agency took nearly 3 hours. They traveled slowly, stopping twice to feed and change the babies. Eli kept one hand near his rifle, though the valley seemed peaceful enough. As they approached the agency buildings, smoke rising from several chimneys, Lena's posture stiffened. Remember, Eli said quietly, we're here by right. These are your people, even if some have forgotten that. The agency yard was busy with morning activity. Several elders stood near the main building, their faces turning hard when they spotted Lena. A group of younger men paused in their wood chopping, watching. 2 women hurried inside, whispering. Agent Thompson, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, emerged from his office. Mr. Ravenford, he nodded to Eli, then looked uncertainly at Lena and the babies. This is unexpected. We've come to properly register these children, Eli said firmly, as is their right under the treaty. Before Thompson could respond, Elder Shockwit strode forward, his face thunderous. These children bring darkness, he proclaimed in English, then switched to Ute, directing harsh words at Lena. Lena lifted her chin, responding in their shared language with quiet dignity. Though Eli couldn't understand the words, he heard strength in her voice. One of the twins made a small sound, and Lena automatically adjusted the sling, never taking her eyes from the elder. A younger woman emerged from the schoolhouse, Sarah Blackhawk, the Ute teacher. She moved to stand beside Lena, her presence both graceful and determined. The old stories speak of twins as sacred gifts, Sarah said, addressing both languages. Our people once celebrated double births as double blessings. Fear has twisted our memories. The settlers push closer every day, Elder Shockwit countered. The railroad men mark our lands. We cannot afford weakness or bad omens. These babies are not omens, Lena said clearly, switching to English so all could understand. They are children of both worlds, born to build bridges, not walls. She unwrapped the blanket enough to show her grandmother's pendant around the older twins' neck. Several of the younger Ute drew closer, their faces softening at the sight of the tiny faces. One old woman crossed herself, a convert, and muttered what sounded like a blessing in Ute. Agent Thompson cleared his throat. "Well, perhaps we should proceed with the registration. Names?" "Dawn River and Morning Star," Lena said firmly. "Children of Lena Whitefeather and—" She glanced at Eli, who nodded. "Protected by Eli Ravenford." While Thompson wrote in his ledger, Sarah approached with a small bundle wrapped in trade cloth. "I have something for you," she told Lena softly. "Herbs for the babies. I heard one had a cough. And this." She pressed a small leather-bound book into Lena's hands. "My grandmother's writings about the old ways. There are things in here about twin births you should know." Elder Shockwit watched this exchange with narrowed eyes, but said nothing more. Several other elders continued to mutter about settlers and railroad surveyors, their tone bitter. But a few of the younger men nodded respectfully to Eli, and one woman brought forward a small beaded blanket as a gift for the babies. They stayed only as long as necessary to complete the registration. As they mounted up to leave, Sarah touched Lena's hand. "Come, again," she said. "The children should know both paths." The ride into town took another hour. The twins slept peacefully, and Eli found himself watching Lena's face as she looked ahead towards the scattered buildings of the settlement. There was both worry and determination in her expression. The little white church stood on the edge of town, its steeple bright against the blue sky. As they approached, the door opened, and Preacher Josiah stepped out, beaming. "I thought I might see you today," he called, hurrying down the steps. "Something in the air told me to wait here instead of riding my circuit." They dismounted carefully, and Josiah immediately moved to help, his weathered hands gentle as he steadied Lena. Inside the church, warm from a pot-bellied stove, he fussed over them like a proud grandfather, insisting they warmed themselves while he fetched coffee. "I have something to show you," he said, returning with not only coffee, but some fresh bread his housekeeper had made. "Been thinking about it since that night in the cabin." He disappeared into his study and returned with a worn leather journal, its pages yellow with age. "This belonged to Grace Runningwater," he explained, handling the book reverently. "A Ute woman who converted back in '48 but kept detailed records of the old teachings. She believed Creator spoke through all traditions." He opened the journal carefully, turning to a marked page. "Here. She writes about a prophecy passed down through the women of her family, about children born of two worlds, marked by silver and starlight, who would come in the time of iron horses and water wars." Lena leaned forward, one hand protectively on the twins, the other touching her grandmother's pendant. "What else does it say?" "That these children would bridge the space between peoples, help them see through eyes of mercy instead of fear. That they would remind both sides of old promises about sharing the land and water." Josiah looked up. "She drew this, too." The page showed a simple sketch of a pendant, almost identical to the one the twins wore. "My grandmother never told me all of this," Lena whispered, "though sometimes she hinted. She said the old women kept certain stories secret, waiting for the right time." "Perhaps this is that time," Josiah said gently. "The railroad companies press harder every day. Water rights grow more contested. But these little ones—" He smiled at the sleeping twins. "They belong to both worlds. Through them, maybe we all learn to see with new eyes." They stayed through afternoon prayers, Josiah blessing the babies with both Christian words and Ute phrases he had learned over his years of ministry. As the sun began its descent, they prepared to leave, the journal's revelations sitting deep in their thoughts. Eli helped Lena mount up, then swung carefully into the saddle behind her, mindful of his healing shoulder. The ride home was quiet, both of them processing all they had learned. The twins stayed peaceful, seemingly unaware of the weight of destiny that had been spoken over them. Just as the cabin came into view, Eli's instincts prickled. He glanced up toward a distant ridge and caught movement, a lone figure on horseback, watching. Even at this distance, something in the posture suggested Toma. The figure remained still for a moment, then melted away into the gathering shadows. They reached the cabin without incident, but Eli took extra care checking the surroundings, while Lena carried the twins inside. The evening was settling clear and cold, stars beginning to pierce the darkening sky. Inside, Lena lit the lamps and laid the sleeping twins in their cradle, while Eli built up the fire. Neither spoke of the watching figure on the ridge. Instead, they focused on the simple tasks of ending the day, feeding the twins, sharing a quiet meal, banking the fire for the night. The revelations from both the agency and the church settled around them like the deepening darkness outside, full of both promise and uncertainty. The old journal's words seemed to hang in the air between them, speaking of bridges yet to be built, peace yet to be made. Through the cabin's window, the stars continued their ancient dance across the sky, bearing witness to the small family below. Two people from different worlds, two tiny babies sleeping in their cradle, and the hope of healing that rested in their shared future. The evening settled around the cabin like a thick blanket, stars piercing the inky sky outside, while warmth and lamplight filled the small space within. Eli stirred the pot of bean soup hanging over the fire, adding the last of their dried corn. The aroma mixed with fresh-baked biscuits, simple fare made special by shared peace. Lena sat in the rocking chair, nursing the twins while humming a soft Ute lullaby. The copper pendant gleamed at one baby's throat, catching firelight. After the revelations at the agency and church, its presence felt even more significant, a physical link between prophecy and present moment. "Reckon these little ones are about done," Lena said softly, adjusting her shawl as the babies finished nursing. "They're getting stronger every day." Eli nodded, reaching for the worn Bible Josiah had left them. The preacher marked some passages he thought might give us comfort. His finger traced down the page until he found the spot. "Here it is. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." The words settled in the quiet room. Lena's eyes grew distant, thoughtful. "Do you truly believe that? That there's a plan in all this?" "I do now." Eli's voice was rough with emotion. "Didn't for a long time after losing Sarah and the baby. But finding you three, can't help thinking there's purpose in it." He served up 2 bowls of soup, passing one to Lena after she settled the twins in their cradle. The fire popped and crackled as they ate, comfortable silence broken by occasional murmurs to the babies. "Been thinking," Eli said finally, setting his empty bowl aside. "Cabin's awful small for 4. Come spring might be time to build proper like, something bigger with real rooms." Lena's eyes brightened. A place where children could learn, both Ute and settler? Exactly that. Eli leaned forward, warming to the idea. Sarah, the teacher at the agency, she seemed keen on the twins knowing both paths. Maybe others could learn alongside them, build understanding while they're young. "My grandmother always said peace grows best in young hearts." Lena glanced at the sleeping twins. These two, born of both worlds, they could help others see there's no need for fear between peoples. They talked softly of possibilities, a schoolroom with windows facing the mountains, gardens where children could learn to grow food together, space for both Bible studies and traditional ceremonies. The fire burned lower as their quiet conversation painted pictures of hope. When the twins stirred for their night feeding, Eli banked the fire while Lena tended them. The routine felt natural now, comfortable. After the babies settled again, they prepared for sleep themselves, Lena and the twins in the bed, Eli in his bunk against the far wall. "Good night," Eli said softly, blowing out the lamp. The cabin fell into darkness, broken only by glowing coals in the fireplace. "Sleep well," Lena whispered back. Soon her breathing deepened into the rhythm of slumber, matched by the tiny sighs of the twins. The night grew deeper. Wind whispered around the cabin corners, and somewhere an owl called. The fire crackled softly, casting shifting shadows on the walls. Near midnight, when the moon had risen high enough to paint silver strips through the window, a new sound broke the peace, the whisper-soft scrape of the door latch lifting. 3 dark figures slipped inside like smoke. Moonlight caught the edge of a rifle barrel, the gleam of a knife. 2 wore cloth masks across their faces, but the third was bare-faced, Toma, his expression twisted with inner turmoil. Eli's eyes snapped open at the sound of boots on floorboards. He started to rise, but the rifle butt struck before he could fully move. The crack of wood against skull was sickeningly loud in the quiet cabin. Eli crumpled to the floor with a muffled grunt. Lena woke to the sound of struggle, instinctively clutching the twins closer. "No!" The scream tore from her throat as hands reached for the babies. "Toma, please!" Her cousin's face was a mask of conflict as he pried one infant from her desperate grip. "This must be done," he said hoarsely in Ute, "for the good of the people. The elders say the curse must end." "There is no curse!" Lena fought with all her strength, but the second warrior grabbed the other twin. His hands shook as he wrapped the baby in a blanket, suggesting his heart wasn't fully in this betrayal. "They are blessed. Children. The prophecy." "Prophecies can be wrong," Toma cut her off, though doubt flickered in his eyes. When Lena lunged for him, he shoved her roughly aside. She hit the floor hard beside Eli's still form. The third warrior moved to strike her, but Toma stopped him. "No, she is still blood." His voice cracked slightly on the word. In moments that felt both endless and too swift, the men were gone, taking the twins into the freezing night. The thunder of hoofbeats faded quickly into distance. Wind gusted through the open door, scattering ashes from the fire. Lena crawled to Eli, touching his face with trembling hands. Blood matted his hair where the rifle had struck. He didn't respond to her touch. Sobs began to tear through her chest as the horrible reality settled in. The twins were gone, Eli was hurt, and the cabin's warmth had shattered into echoing emptiness. She pressed her forehead to the rough floorboards beside Eli, her cries rising to fill the violated space. The empty cradle loomed in the firelight like an accusation. Outside, clouds crossed the moon, and darkness deepened around the cabin where hope had lived such a short time ago. Dawn crept over the mountains, pale light filtering through the cabin's frosted windows. Eli stirred, consciousness returning with a wave of throbbing pain. His hand went to his head, finding dried blood matted in his hair. The events of the night crashed back, the intruders, the sudden blow, Lena's screams. He pushed himself up, fighting dizziness, and his heart clenched at the sight before him. Lena sat huddled by the cold hearth, her face buried in her hands. The empty cradle stood like a wound in the quiet cabin. "Lena?" His voice cracked. She looked up, eyes red and swollen from hours of crying. "They took them," she whispered. "Toma and 2 others. They took our babies." Eli allowed himself one moment of crushing grief, one heartbeat to feel the weight of this betrayal. Then he straightened, pushing aside pain for action. "We're going after them. Now." He moved quickly to the wash basin, cleaning the gash on his head with careful fingers. Lena rose too, purpose replacing despair in her movements. She gathered blankets, stuffing them into saddlebags along with dried meat and hard biscuits. Her hands paused over her grandmother's small medicine pouch before adding it as well. At the gun rack, Eli checked his single-action rifle, loading fresh cartridges. He counted the remaining ammunition, too few for a prolonged fight, and tucked them carefully into his coat pockets. Each bullet would have to count if it came to shooting. They stepped outside into bitter cold. The sun had barely cleared the eastern peaks, casting long shadows across untouched snow. Clear tracks led away from the cabin. 3 horses, heading toward the deep canyon where the Ute winter camps lay. "They have hours on us," Eli said, studying the trail. "But the snow will slow them, especially with babies to carry." Lena nodded, her jaw set. They mounted Eli's horse together, her arms tight around his waist as they started down the trail. The gelding was strong, but carrying double meant careful going. At steep or icy spots, they dismounted, leading him between them. The sun climbed higher as they followed the kidnapper's path. Eli kept his rifle across the saddle horn, eyes scanning the ridges above. Lena remained silent behind him, but he could feel her trembling. From cold or fear or fury, he wasn't sure. Around midday, they paused beneath a rocky overhang. The horse needed rest, and they needed to keep up their strength. Sharing strips of jerky and sips from their water skin, they huddled close for warmth. Lena's voice rose suddenly in prayer, mixing Ute words with English. "Creator God, protect my little ones. Keep them warm, keep them safe until we come. Give us strength to bring them home." Eli squeezed her hand, adding his own silent plea to hers. They pressed on through the afternoon, the trail leading deeper into the canyon lands. The sun was lowering when Eli reined in sharply, pointing to a thin tendril of smoke rising from the canyon below. Through his field glass, he could make out several lodges tucked against the cliff face. "That's them," he said grimly. "Probably met up with the elders. We should wait for dark, then go in shooting. Element of surprise might be our only advantage." But Lena gripped his arm hard. "No." Her voice was fierce but steady. "These are my people, however wrong they're acting. More blood won't heal what fear has broken. We must try words first, try to make them see truth." "They tried to kill you once already," Eli reminded her. "Left you to freeze with newborns." "And Creator sent you to save us," she countered. "Not for revenge, but for healing. The prophecy speaks of peace, not more death. We have to believe that." Eli studied her face in the fading light, seeing the steel beneath her gentle spirit. He thought of the old journal at the church, speaking of children who would bridge nations. What bridge could be built on bloodshed? As darkness gathered around them, they found a sheltered spot overlooking the camp. Together they knelt in the snow, hands clasped. Their prayers rose without words into the star-filled night, asking for wisdom, for courage, for a path through confrontation that would heal rather than destroy. Below, fires flickered in the canyon, marking where their children lay. Dawn would bring the moment of truth, whether faith and persuasion could overcome generations of fear and mistrust. Dawn painted the canyon walls in shades of amber as Lena drew her cloak tight and began the descent into the camp. Above, Eli moved silently through the rocks to find his position, the rifle cold in his hands but his finger well away from the trigger. He watched Lena's small figure grow smaller as she approached the cluster of lodges below. In the camp, morning fires sent smoke curling skyward. The twins lay, bundled in blankets near the largest blaze, their tiny faces peaceful in sleep. Toma stood guard nearby, his expression troubled as he watched the elders argue in their semicircle. "The curse must end here," Elder Shockwit insisted, his voice sharp with fear. "Our people cannot risk. The children could serve better purpose," another elder cut in. "The railroad fears native unrest. We could use that." Lena's clear voice stopped their debate. "I speak with the voice of my grandmother, Medicine Woman White Deer." She stepped into the firelight, head high. "She taught me our true ways, ways that honored every child as Creator's gift, ways that called cowards those who would spill innocent blood." Murmurs rippled through the camp. A young warrior, Kania, who had hesitated during the kidnapping, moved to stand beside her. Others followed, drawn by the truth in her words. "Our people face real enemies," Lena continued, "but you seek false solutions." Her eyes found Toma's face. "Some here have already sold their honor." She pointed to Elder Shockwit's belongings, where the edge of a leather pouch peeked out. "There you'll find letters from the railroad man, Briggs. Payment for keeping us frightened and fighting amongst ourselves." From his perch above, Eli could see the shock ripple through the gathered people as another warrior pulled out papers and wrapped coins. Toma's face went pale as his dealings with Briggs were exposed. "The railroad wants us divided," Lena declared. "They feed our fear so they can claim we're dangerous. Then soldiers will come and our lands will be lost." The camp erupted in angry shouts. Elders turned on each other, demands for truth mixing with accusations. In the chaos, Toma's control finally broke. He lunged forward, snatched one of the twins from the blankets, and bolted toward the canyon rim. The baby's cry cut through the uproar like a knife as Toma disappeared into the rocks, desperation driving him toward the cliff edge. The canyon rim glowed orange in the setting sun as Toma scrambled upward, the baby's cries echoing off the stone walls. His boots slipped on loose gravel, but desperation drove him higher until he reached the upper ledge. There, Eli stood waiting, having raced down from his lookout position. "Give me the child," Eli said quietly, his hands open and steady. Toma backed away, his heel finding empty air at the cliff's edge. The infant wailed louder, tiny fingers reaching toward the darkening sky. The two men lunged at each other, grappling near the precipice. Toma's foot caught on a root, throwing him off balance. For one heart-stopping moment, the baby dangled over the ravine, supported only by Toma's trembling grip. Eli's rifle lay within easy reach. One quick grab, one shot, and it would be over. Instead, he kicked the weapon aside and dove forward, wrapping one arm around the child and the other around Toma's chest. With a mighty heave, he pulled them both back onto solid ground. They collapsed onto the rocks, all three breathing hard. The baby hiccuped and settled against Eli's chest as Toma curled into himself, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I took their money," he confessed, as warriors crested the ridge behind them. "Briggs promised influence, promised protection when the railroad came. I let fear poison my heart." Back in the camp, confronted with their corruption, several elders stood defiant. But most slumped in their seats, stripped of false authority. An elderly woman named Morning Star approached Lena, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "We abandoned our own," she whispered, pulling Lena and both twins into a fierce embrace. "Creator, forgive us." As evening painted the sky in deep purple, a council fire blazed to life. Lena sat in the inner circle, one twin in each arm, with Eli beside her. The flames cast dancing shadows on the canyon walls as the tribe formally renounced the curse that had brought such pain. "Our children are not harbingers of doom," Morning Star declared, her voice carrying to all gathered. "They are bridges to tomorrow, just as the prophecy foretold." The stars emerged one by one above them as the tribe chose a new path forward, one of healing rather than fear, of unity rather than division. A week had passed since that fateful night at the canyon rim. Riders on horseback had crisscrossed the valley daily, carrying messages between the Ute camp, the town, and scattered ranches. Now, on a crisp morning, the town's small church filled with an unlikely gathering. Ute delegates in traditional dress, weathered settlers in their Sunday best, and ranchers still dusted with trail dirt. Lena and Eli sat near the front, the twins sleeping peacefully in woven blankets. Preacher Josiah stood at the simple wooden pulpit, his gray beard catching the light from tall windows. "Creator of all peoples," he began, "guide us toward wisdom and peace." His prayer drew quiet amens from both buckskin-clad warriors and bonnet-wearing ranch wives. Lena rose first, her voice steady as she described the night her babies were abandoned, and how fear of a curse had nearly destroyed not just her family, but the valley's future. The Ute spokesman followed, speaking of ancient wisdom twisted by modern greed. Toma stepped forward next, his proud shoulders now bent with humility. "I betrayed 2 peoples," he admitted, looking first at his tribe, then at the settlers. "Briggs offered money and promises. I let fear of losing power cloud my judgment." His words hung heavy in the church air. Deputy Clay stood, pulling folded papers from his vest. "These letters show how Briggs manipulated both sides," he announced, promising water rights he didn't own, inciting violence for railroad gain. Briggs, seated near the back in his fine coat, jumped up. "This is outrageous. I represent progress, civilization. You'll all be sorry when the army—" "Sit down, Briggs," Clay interrupted, steel in his voice. "You're under arrest for fraud and incitement to violence." 2 ranchers moved to block the door as Clay approached with handcuffs. The meeting continued well past noon. Voices that had once argued now sought common ground. They drafted an accord, shared access to the creek system, respect for existing homesteads and tribal hunting grounds, and a council of both peoples to settle future disputes. As the sun painted the western sky in deep gold, people lingered outside the church, sharing coffee and conversation. Eli led Lena to a quiet spot beneath an old cottonwood. His hands trembled slightly as he took hers. "I ain't good with fancy words," he started, voice rough with emotion. "But I offer you my homestead, my name, and my sacred promise to honor your people and your faith. The twins need a father, and I—" He paused, swallowing hard. "I need you." Tears welled in Lena's eyes. She pressed one hand to her heart, overwhelmed by the day's events and this tender offering. After a moment that seemed to stretch like shadow across the valley, she leaned forward and pressed a soft kiss to his weathered cheek. A wordless promise of tomorrow. The hard grip of winter was finally loosening its hold on the valley. Snowmelt trickled down from the peaks, feeding the river that curved past Eli's homestead. On this bright morning, the land itself seemed to welcome the gathering of both settlers and Ute families who stood in a wide circle near the water's edge. Eli had spent days preparing, building rough benches from fresh-cut pine and clearing space for the ceremony. Now he stood beside Lena, who cradled their twins in blankets adorned with both tribal and settler patterns that Mrs. Hatcher had helped stitch. Preacher Josiah stepped forward, his Bible weathered but cherished, while a respected tribal elder moved to stand beside him. The morning sun caught the silver in both men's hair as they raised their hands over the babies. "These children," Josiah began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd, "born in storm but saved by faith, will now receive names to honor both their peoples." The elder spoke in Ute, then English. "The girl child we name River Bridge, for she will join what was divided." He touched the first twin's forehead gently. "The boy child we name Keeper of Peace, for he will maintain what his sister builds." Mrs. Hatcher dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Even Colby Turner, standing quietly at the edge of the gathering, lowered his head in respect, his earlier anger softened by weeks of seeing how peace served the valley better than spite. After the blessing, tables laden with food drew everyone together. Settler wives had brought pies and bread, while Ute women shared traditional dishes. The schoolteacher from the agency moved among the groups, helping translate stories and laughter. Near the river's edge, children played together without thought to differences. A settler boy showed his Ute friends how to skip stones across the water, while young tribal girls taught settler children to weave simple grass patterns. Toma stood apart, watching the little ones with careful eyes. The weight of his past choices still showed in his shoulders, but in caring for the children, he seemed to find small measures of peace. When a young one stumbled, he helped them up with gentle hands. His path of penance walked one kind act at a time. As evening painted the sky in soft spring colors, Lena touched Eli's arm and drew him aside. They walked to the spot where he had first proposed, beneath the old cottonwood tree. "That night on the ridge," she said softly, "when they left me with the twins, I thought my life was ending." She looked up at him, her eyes bright. But God and Creator used that darkness to bring light, used fear to build love. She took his hands in hers. "Yes, Eli Ravenford. Yes to marriage, to building a home that honors both our ways." Joy spread across Eli's weathered face as he drew her close, careful of the sleeping twins between them. Later that night, lamplight glowed warm through the windows of their cabin, now expanded with a small addition Eli and the neighbors had built. Inside, the twins slept peacefully in a new cradle, carved with symbols of both their heritages. Eli stepped out onto the porch, listening to the gentle voice of the river. No wolf howls haunted the darkness now. He remembered that desperate dream that had driven him into the storm months ago, and how what seemed a curse had become a blessing for the entire valley. "Thank you," he whispered to the stars, his heart full of gratitude for the mystery of God's ways and the precious gift of his new family. "Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.